Well, we've seen so far that creation care is fundamental to our humanity. Creation care is intrinsic to what it looks like to love our neighbour. And right now we're going to think about the fact that creation care is part of God's mission. And to do that, I want to turn to Psalm 19 and read just the first 6 verses. It's a psalm that picks up on many of those words that we just sung, or better said, those words pick up on this psalm. So let's read Psalm 19, verses 1 through to 6 together. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. Psalm 19 is a wonderful psalm that speaks about the part that creation has to play in this general revelation of who God is. And then later, the importance of God's special revelation, his words. And the point that the psalmist is making is fairly incredible, isn't it? The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. The psalmist is saying, you want to know what God is like? Well, have a little look at his creation. Have a look at the heavens which declare his glory. And what's more, the psalmist is saying, not only should we look there, but actually as we look to creation, creation speaks. Creation speaks of who God is. It's God's way of speaking to us. Well, I wonder whether you think this is unique to this flowery psalm. Well, wonderfully, Paul, in his crisp letter to the Romans, in chapter 1, writes something very similar about creation. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through to 20, Paul writes this: "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse." See what Paul is saying? He's saying very similar things to the psalmist. Only the psalmist is saying, do you want to know what God is like? Have a look at creation. And Paul is saying there's no excuse for acknowledging who God is. He's revealed himself in creation. The two passages are just a couple of the high points. See, the Bible unashamedly speaks about creation time and time again as that which points to God, that which praises God, but also that through which God displays his just judgment and his rich blessing. See, in the Old Testament, God frequently uses natural events, the creation, to display his judgment on his people and on the nations around them. I think it's all of that which leads Paul to say what we've just read, that man is without excuse on the day of judgment, for God has revealed himself through creation. And in some ways, as we reflect on our own engagement with creation, it's obvious, isn't it, that creation reveals much of who he is. His majesty, his love, his care and attention, his order. If we're honest, the beauty of creation for me can sometimes just be summed up in the wonderful Fibonacci sequence you see in a Romanesco cauliflower, or the way in which a mother cub cares for her young. But creation also holds up a mirror to our selfishness, as we use our dominion, our authority over creation, to wipe out species, as we wipe out some of God's blessing. as we use our dominion over creation to display a lack of compassion for the vulnerable by hoarding harvests for ourselves. You see, here is where the gospel speaks more poignantly into the situation than even the most radical environmentalist. In that short clip that we watched of David Attenborough, he totally missed the point. I don't know if you noticed it. He said something like this: if we don't act in the next decade, we will see the collapse of our societies. But the point is this: our societies have already collapsed and failed. In fact, in Genesis 3, we see that as man walks away from God, as man disobeys, one of the results is that creation is put under a curse. Thorns and thistles spring up. The fact that creation is under a curse is a direct result of the collapse of humanity's relationship with God. You see, the fact that global warming is such a significant issue is ultimately down to human greed. Sure, global warming will contribute to societies and cultures being displaced and maybe even wiped out, but to attribute the collapse of society to anything other than our human sinfulness is to be naively hopeful about humanity. The Bible is far more realistic. It places the collapse of society's fault in the human heart. It places the reason for global warming in human hearts. And so there's something much more striking, much more difficult that it calls each one of us to. You see, as God speaks to us through creation and reveals his goodness, his glory, his majesty, we trample on it. We reject it. We burn it. We do over and over again what Adam and Eve did in the garden. We reject God's goodness, thinking that we know better, thinking that we've got a better plan. And so I think what we see throughout the Bible is that actually God is speaking to us through creation, speaking to us of himself and revealing much of our sinful hearts.